Imagine standing on a stretch of rocky ground in the Andes and being told there's a fortune buried beneath your boots. A mountain of copper big enough to rewrite the map of global industry. Sounds like a movie set, right? But it's real. This place was nicknamed a hell mine because every expert who looked at it saw only danger, brutal weather, crumbling roads, and equipment that refused to work. Still, China paid $7 billion to buy it. Why would anyone spend billions for a frozen, hostile slope that supposedly no one could mine? Because this isn't just about metal in the ground, it's about control of the raw ingredients for the future. Copper is the wiring of modern life. It's in electric cars, wind turbines, power grids, and solar farms. When a country depends on other nations for that metal, a single strike or port closure can spike prices and stall factories. That fear, and the math behind the deposit, turned a mocked purchase into a strategic bet. A decade after the buy, satellite photos and freight movements tell a different story. The place is active, roads rebuilt, or moving out. What looked like a reckless gamble has started to pay off. But the big question is still the same. How did they turn a literal hell into a working mine? Next, we'll dig into the killer obstacles that made this mining site almost impossible. The altitude, the ice, the roads, and the accidents that scared off everyone else. Section 2. Why it was called Hell Mine. To understand what makes this mine so extreme, picture working on a mountain so high that airplanes usually fly at the same altitude. That's the Las Bambas copper mine in Peru, perched over 13,000 feet above sea level, where the air is thin, the cold bites, and the terrain constantly shifts with landslides. Even walking feels like running a marathon. For heavy machinery and workers, it's brutal. When construction first began, trucks carrying ore had to crawl down hundreds of kilometers of dirt roads that turned into rivers during the rainy season. Every load risked being stranded or overturned. Local protests often shut down those roads for days or even weeks. And because this is one of the largest copper reserves in the world, delays weren't just inconvenient, they could cost millions per day. Engineers called it a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to build a modern factory at the top of Mount Everest. That's how bad it was. Temperatures dropped below freezing at night, oxygen levels were so low that engines failed, and just keeping workers healthy became a challenge. Many Western mining firms studied it and walked away, deciding it wasn't worth the risk. So when China's MMG, backed by the state-owned China Minmetals Corporation, bought the mine from Glencore in 2014, critics said it was a mistake, a political trophy, not a business decision. The world called it Hell Mine. But Beijing saw something others missed, not just copper, but long-term leverage in the global supply chain. Next, we'll explore why copper is so critical to China's economic and geopolitical ambitions, and how this single metal fits into the country's broader strategy for industrial dominance. To grasp why China fought so hard for this mine, you have to understand what copper means to the modern world. Copper is literally the artery of the global economy. It conducts electricity, powers motors, and connects every circuit that makes modern life work. From smartphones to skyscrapers, from electric vehicles to high-speed trains, nothing moves without copper. Now, as the world races toward clean energy, copper has become even more precious. Electric cars, for example, use 3 to 4 times more copper than gas-powered ones. Every new wind turbine and solar farm is packed with it. The International Energy Agency estimates that by 2030, global copper demand could rise by 40%, mostly driven by electrification and renewable projects. Here's the catch. China already dominates industries that use copper, EVs, batteries, power grids, and manufacturing, but it doesn't have enough copper at home. China produces only about 8% of global supply, but consumes more than half of it. That imbalance leaves Beijing exposed to price swings, export bans, and geopolitical shocks. So, buying Las Bambas wasn't just a mining deal. It was a strategic insurance policy, a way to secure long-term access to a resource that underpins its entire industrial machine. Think of it like owning the oil wells that feed your car factory. Without them, your future growth depends on someone else's mercy. But here's where it gets even more interesting. China didn't just buy the mine, it rebuilt the entire ecosystem around it, from roads and ports to local agreements. Next, we'll look at how China transformed this once impossible mine. The technology, infrastructure, and political maneuvers that turned a frozen wasteland into one of the world's top copper producers. When China's MMG took over Las Bambas, it didn't just inherit a mine, it inherited a crisis. Equipment failures, community protests, and isolation had already crippled operations. But instead of backing off, China did what it does best: build, connect, and scale. The first move was pure engineering muscle. Chinese teams redesigned the entire logistics network, carving out hundreds of kilometers of new transport routes through the Andes, reinforcing bridges, and paving the mining corridor that now links Las Bambas to Peru's southern coast. They imported heavy-duty trucks designed to handle high-altitude conditions and built oxygen-enriched work zones so laborers could operate safely at 13,000 feet. But the transformation wasn't just physical, it was diplomatic. MMG began working directly with local communities, funding schools, healthcare centers, and employment programs. They also negotiated long-term agreements with Peruvian authorities to reduce roadblock disruptions that had plagued Western companies. By 2016, only 2 years after the takeover, Las Bambas had become one of the top 10 copper producers in the world, delivering nearly 400,000 tons of copper concentrate annually. That's enough metal to wire thousands of cities. And while most of the profits flow back to China, Peru gained 2 new infrastructure, jobs, and tax revenue. What once looked like an unprofitable disaster had been turned into a strategic success story. But the real payoff for China wasn't just money, it was leverage. Every shipment of copper leaving Peru now feeds China's electric grid, car factories, and chip industries, deepening its control over a critical global resource chain. Next, we'll zoom out to see how this one mine fits into China's global mining empire, from Africa to South America, and how it's quietly reshaping who controls the world's minerals. Las Bambas is just one chapter in a much bigger story. A global campaign that's been unfolding quietly for over 2 decades. While the West focused on software, finance, and social media, China was busy locking down the raw materials that power everything: copper, lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths. From the copper belts of Zambia to the lithium salt flats of Bolivia, Chinese companies, often backed by state-owned banks, poured billions into mining projects. These aren't random deals. They're part of a coordinated strategy under Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. The goal is simple: secure supply chains from the ground up. Take Africa, for example. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, China controls more than 70% of cobalt production, a mineral essential for EV batteries. In Chile, Chinese firms now hold stakes in major lithium operations, giving them influence over one of the world's largest lithium reserves. And across Central Asia, Beijing has invested heavily in copper and nickel mines to reduce dependence on Western suppliers. What ties all these moves together is control, not just of materials, but of the entire supply chain: mining, refining, and manufacturing. Most of these resources are shipped to China, refined there, and then exported as high-value goods: batteries, electronics, and cars. It's the perfect loop: resource in, technology out. Meanwhile, Western countries are only now waking up to this reality. The United States and European Union have launched their own critical minerals alliances, but they're years behind. China didn't just buy mines. It built ecosystems around them: ports, railways, smelters, and trade routes that make it nearly impossible to compete. And this brings us to a bigger question. Is the world ready for a future where one country controls the materials that power the green transition? Next, we'll look at the geopolitical consequences, how this global mining dominance is shifting power, reshaping alliances, and forcing the United States to rethink its entire resource strategy. Section 6. The geopolitical consequences. Copper might seem like a simple industrial metal, but in today's world, it's becoming a geopolitical weapon. Whoever controls its flow controls the speed of global electrification, and that's exactly what China has positioned itself to do. The United States and its allies are, increasingly nervous. Washington's defense and energy departments now list copper, lithium, and rare earths as critical minerals, meaning their shortage could threaten national security. Without stable access, electric vehicle production, renewable energy expansion, and even military technology would slow down. Meanwhile, Beijing's control gives it a powerful economic lever. In trade disputes, China can restrict exports, raise prices, or reroute supply, actions that ripple across markets almost instantly. We've already seen similar moves before. In 2010, China temporarily cut rare earth exports to Japan during a diplomatic standoff, sending global prices soaring. Copper could one day be used the same way, but it's not just about pressure, it's about influence. Countries in Africa, South America, and Central Asia now see China not just as a buyer, but as a builder, the partner who brings roads, railways, and jobs. That soft power is reshaping alliances. Nations rich in minerals increasingly side with Beijing on trade and diplomatic issues because their economies are tied to Chinese investment. The United States has tried to respond, launching the Minerals Security Partnership with allies like Japan and Australia, and funding projects in Chile and Zambia. But these efforts are still fragmented. The reality is, China has a 15-year head start, and its dominance stretches from the mine shaft to the factory floor. And yet, this strategy comes with risks. Operating in politically unstable regions, rising anti-mining protests, and growing scrutiny of China's influence are creating new friction points that could threaten this dominance. Next, we'll explore those emerging challenges: the local backlash, the political risks, and the global pushback that could slow China's march toward total mineral control. For all its success, China's mining empire isn't invincible. It's facing growing resistance from the very regions that made it powerful. Local communities, governments, and even rival corporations are pushing back hard, exposing the cracks in Beijing's grand strategy. In Peru, where the Las Bambas mine sits, tensions have flared repeatedly. Villagers accuse MMG of environmental damage and broken promises on job creation. Since 2016, the mine has been shut down more than 10 times due to blockades along the mining corridor. Every closure costs millions of dollars and halts copper exports that China depends on. What started as protests over dust and road use has evolved into a national debate about resource sovereignty, who really benefits from these billion-dollar deals. The story is similar in Africa. In Zambia and the Congo, local leaders are renegotiating contracts, demanding fairer revenue sharing, and in some cases, threatening to nationalize Chinese-run mines. Even Latin America's political shift to the left has made governments more cautious about foreign resource control. The once open door is starting to close. On top of that, the global mood is changing. Western nations are quietly warning about resource dependency. The fear that relying on China for raw materials could mirror Europe's past dependence on Russian gas. It's prompting new policies, like the United States Inflation Reduction Act, which incentivizes domestic mining and North American partnerships. China also faces internal challenges. Its economy is slowing, its demand for copper is fluctuating, and global scrutiny of its overseas practices, from labor conditions to environmental impact, is intensifying. Even within China, over-investment in resource projects has raised concerns about profitability and debt exposure. So while Beijing still dominates the map, it's becoming harder to maintain that control without backlash. The world is waking up and starting to fight for its share of the minerals race. Next, we'll bring it all together. looking at what Las Bambas really symbolizes in China's rise. Not just a mining victory, but a blueprint for how economic power, diplomacy, and resource strategy converge in the 21st century. Las Bambas is more than a mine. It's a mirror reflecting how China builds global power in the modern era, not through armies or invasions, but through infrastructure, investment, and patience. What started as a risky $7 billion gamble in the high Andes turned into a symbol of China's ability to take on what others called impossible and make it work, at least for a while. The project shows how China blends state strategy with corporate muscle. MMG didn't act alone. It had the full backing of Chinese banks, engineering firms, and logistics networks. It's the same model used from Africa's copper belts to Indonesia's nickel islands. One where business serves diplomacy and diplomacy protects business. It's not just mining, it's nation building abroad, one shipment at a time. But Las Bambas also exposes the limits of that model. The protests, roadblocks, and local tensions remind us that development isn't just about digging minerals, it's about earning trust. China's rise has been fueled by ambition, but maintaining it will require learning how to share benefits more equitably with host nations. Otherwise, the same roads and ports that enabled progress could one day become points of resistance. For the world, Las Bambas is a warning and a lesson. It shows how control over raw materials equals influence, and how quickly the balance of power can shift when one country masters that equation. For decades, the West owned the technology in the capital. Today, China owns the minerals that make that technology possible, and that's why this remote, icy mountain matters so much. It's not just about copper, it's about the future of industrial sovereignty. Whoever owns the resources owns the next era of progress. Next, we'll wrap up with the final conclusion and takeaway. What this means for investors, policymakers, and anyone trying to understand how global power is being redrawn, one mine at a time. The story of Las Bambas is the story of a global shift happening quietly beneath our feet. While headlines focus on tech, AI, and stock markets, the real foundation of power is still buried in the ground, in copper, lithium, cobalt, and nickel. And China understood that long before anyone else. By turning an impossible mine into a functioning powerhouse, Beijing sent a clear message: the future belongs to those who control the materials that build it. From the Andes to Africa, from Southeast Asia to Central Asia, China's resource strategy is reshaping global trade and redefining what economic dominance looks like. For investors, it's a wake-up call. The next big race isn't just for market share or innovation, it's for resource security. Every electric car, every renewable grid, every battery depends on a fragile web of global mining operations. When one country sits at the center of that web, the rest of the world must adapt or fall behind. For policymakers, it's a reminder that control of minerals equals leverage, both economic and political. The challenge now is whether the United States, Europe, and their allies can build a sustainable alternative before the gap becomes permanent. And for ordinary people, it's a lesson in how interconnected our world truly is. The phone in your hand, the car you drive, the light that powers your home, they all trace back to places like Las Bambas, where geopolitics meets geology. So the next time you hear about a mine in a remote mountain range or a new trade deal for raw materials, don't scroll past it. That's not just a mining story. That's the story of who will control the next century.